the butterfly is almost a combination of his monogram, JMW. Over the years, his butterfly motif continues to be refined. By the end, it acquires a stinger. And there may be something to say about the fact that peacocks eat butterflies.
Fine arts illuminate our present and explicate our past. SCAD professors teach brilliant young creators every day. And in this series, we reveal the works that most inspire our experts. This is SCADclass.
We've heard of a room with a view, but what about a room with a feud? Let's step inside Harmony in Blue and Gold, the Peacock Room. Joining me is SCAD Associate Chair of Art History, Christian Carr.
There are so many avenues of exploration that we can take into this remarkable work of art, the magnificent Peacock Room. It's not just a work of art. You can think about it as an object. You can think about it as an immersive environment.
It's an immersive experience.
And the feeling of being inside of it, the four walls, the ceiling, and even the floor, right? That six-sided space, so to speak. Before digital technology was invented, people were being transformed by the experience of walking inside. I mean, you can imagine. Stops you in your tracks.
Well, how did all of this get started? Let's talk about the players.
Yes, the players. So we're talking about James McNeill Whistler, an artistic force, a persona, a society figure, a character.
He had such an international flair. He was an American, but he grew up in Russia.
He brought new modes of painting to Great Britain.
He traveled to South America, and he was passionate about Japan.
Precisely.
He was an internationalist.
Oh, he was. We can think about him as well as demonstrating this fact that art has always been global. He was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, 1834. He sometimes referred to that as his accident of birth because soon the family was off. And so, yes, he had this incredibly expatriate, cosmopolitan upbringing. He determines that he wants to study art, so he finds his way to Paris as a 20-year-old and spends about a decade in Paris, participates in the infamous 1863 Salon de Refusé.
Oh yes, the art exhibition of works rejected by the Paris Salon. Manet famously exhibited his work there.
Indeed, and
Napoleon's invention, right?
Yes, Napoleon III, precisely. And so the Symphony in White #1, The White Girl,
Yes.
is
So
his
beautiful.
entry there. So beautiful, so radical.
Whistler seems to play with ideas from music. He titles some works nocturnes, some harmony, some arrangement. It does evoke musical terms, and obviously he had that in mind at some point too. He said, "Nature contains the elements in color and form of all pictures, as the keyboard contains the notes
of all music. But the artist is born to pick and choose and group with science these elements, that the result may be beautiful. As the musician gathers his notes and forms his chords,
till he brings forth from chaos glorious harmony."
That is such a beautifully chosen quotation, and he labored over that phrase. He includes it as part of a famous lecture, the 10 o'clock lecture, where he's really thought about how to express what he believes at his core.
And this is exemplified in his most iconic work, the arrangement in gray and black.
Yes, yes.
The portrait of his mother.
The iconic portrait of his mother. That portrait was the very first painting by an American artist ever acquired by an official French museum.
Wonderful.
And so Whistler, despite being part of the Salon de Refusé in 1863, was by the 1890s embraced and celebrated.
He redeemed himself.
He redeemed himself. But I think it speaks to your point about his insistence on giving his works titles that come from music. The arrangement in Black and Gray, the artist's mother, he said, it shouldn't be of interest to anyone other than me that it's a portrait of my mother. It's all about the connection between the blacks and the grays and the whites. And some of his other well-known works are indeed the nocturnes. And
so beautiful.
So they are, to my money, just chillingly beautiful. And this reminds us of what Whistler is doing on his return from Paris to London. He is painting what he feels and perceives rather than a true representation of what he sees.
Mm-hmm.
He would, in London, hire people to row him up and down the river at night. He wouldn't sketch, he wouldn't take notes, he would just experience and absorb. And then this was his expression painted on canvas. After his time in Paris, Whistler makes his way to London, and he has about 20 years in London that we could perhaps generously describe as bumpy. Some highlights, some low points. And this is the thing, is when we think about beauty, we think about aestheticism, right? And that was near and dear to Whistler's heart.
Kind of moving from romanticism and realism
Yes,
to aestheticism, and then maybe eventually impressionism.
precisely so. And one of the things that we have to recognize about Whistler is he strongly believed, like he would die on this hill, right? That all art needs to do is be beautiful. If it's beautiful, we're asking enough of it. It does not need to have great moral meaning. It does not have to have important content. It doesn't need to go back to the Bible or
It's not about the
mythology.
church, yes.
Not at all.
It's art for art's sake.
100%. That is the credo of the aesthetic movement. Unfortunately, that also puts Whistler firmly at odds with the most important and influential art critic of the day,
Ooh, John Ruskin.
our friend John Ruskin. Ruskin really believes that art should be a reflection of nature and that it should connect to established themes. It should have a beginning, a middle, and end that are easily understood. He also wanted to make art accessible and understandable to those who hadn't had artistic training or been to art schools.
Yes.
This is where we get in trouble. Ruskin publishes a review of an exhibition in which Whistler's painting The Nocturne, the Falling Rocket in black and gold is mentioned.
I have seen and heard much of Cockney impudence before now, but never expected to hear a coxcomb ask 200 guineas for flinging a pot of paint in the public's face.
Flinging a pot of paint in the public's face
Ooh.
and asking 200 guineas.
Yes.
For
Well, that
his
was the
work.
real,
That was
crime.
the real thing. But I think what people forget is this was published in a working man's magazine. And it wouldn't have come to the attention of the art world necessarily. They weren't the audience for it. Because Ruskin was so important, people followed everything he wrote, everything he did. And so people started showing Whistler this review. And so Whistler, full of indignity,
Yes.
turns the tables.
I
Yes.
think he went too far, though.
He ends up suing Ruskin for libel.
It can most generously be described as a Pyrrhic victory, right?
Yes.
After a trial that riveted the entire London art world, the judge found that Ruskin had been libelous in his description of Whistler's art. The court awarded Whistler the least amount possible. I mean, an infinitesimal amount, essentially a quarter of a penny, just symbolic. Whistler actually publishes a polemic, a pamphlet after the resolution of the trial. And it was so popular that it ran out every week. He had it printed every week for 6 weeks, and people really wanted to read what he had to say about it.
He was a celebrity of his time.
He was. And so you can imagine this being splashed all over the tabloids, and Whistler's always looking for a way to make a buck. And so he might as well capitalize from that because he certainly didn't win anything from the trial. Ruskin is so rattled by the whole thing that he has a breakdown and he leaves his professorship of art at Oxford over it.
Wow.
Yes, so it's a big deal. So Whistler's in a position of having to find ways to make money to pay the court cost.
Yeah.
And all of that is reflected in the magnificent Peacock Room. And so the story of a room, I think, is a very human story, right? So artistic passions, but then the cold, hard facts of cash and capital sort of clashing in this space. The players, to get back to your initial point, right? So James McNeill Whistler and then Frederick Leyland. Leyland, another fascinating story, a self-made man whose mother got him a job as a bookkeeper at a shipping line. That was his first job. By the age of 30, he's a partner in the shipping company. By the age of 40, he owns it. So this is a guy who knows the value.
The rapid rise through industry.
A Liverpool Medici.
That's right. And how do you show that you're not just focused on money?
Yes.
Right? Like the Medici, you patronize artists and you collect art. And so he and his wife and family had a lovely home in Liverpool. This home, the original location of the Peacock Room, was in London at 49 Prince's Gate, only the second home he ever owned, so you know he wanted to make it special. Leyland had patronized Whistler before we even get to Prince's Gate. Whistler had painted full-length grand manner portraits of both Leyland and his wife.
Beautiful ones, too.
So beautiful. One of the things that he intended to do in this home was to use it as a showcase for his art and his taste. And so...
Especially his porcelain, right?
Oh, his porcelain. That was really the focus of the dining room.
Yes.
And he hired a well-known designer, Thomas Jekyll, to create that showcase. And so within the dining room, walnut shelving of the proportions to highlight the Kanchi blue and white ceramics that were his passion. This is an artist rendering of what those wall coverings would have looked like with the plain walnut shelves and the leather wall hangings.
They were antiques, part of Catherine of Aragon's dowry, right?
Indeed.
And emblazoned with a pattern of heraldic roses and pomegranates.
Precisely. Whistler had initially been hired to work at the London townhouse of Leyland to do some panels on the stairs.
But meanwhile, in the dining room, Jekyll falls ill and can't finish the job.
Poor Thomas Jekyll, he's unable to put the finishing touches on the room. They asked Whistler for his recommendations on the color to paint the shutters and the color to paint the door. When we get to the point with the room where they're ready for the punch list, just the few last little touches, Whistler comes in to deliver the painting that we see and that still today is over the fireplace. And this is our Princess from the Land of Porcelain. This was purchased with this space in the room in mind. And to Whistler's mind, although this was to be initially his sole contribution to the room, it was the centerpiece, right? And so everything else in the room should harmonize with it. Now you'll notice that the princess is posed wearing a kimono.
Yes.
And she's standing on a blue and white rug that almost looks like a flat piece of Leyland's porcelain collection, silhouetted in front of this golden screen that is a folding screen that symbolizes, right, Japanese art, with her fan. And you'll notice her red obi or sash.
Yes.
Right? When Whistler went to hang that, he noticed that there were elements of the leather wall hangings that both Leyland and Jekyll were so excited about setting off the porcelain to perfection. Whistler thought it was competing with the red. And so thinking about this, he said, you know, what I'd like to do is add some touches of gold over the red. Just on the right-hand side, that was the original door to the butler's pantry. And so he gained permission from Leyland to take some of the pattern of what they called the wave motif, very much like the design on my jacket.
Beautiful.
Or what you can see, the design on the ceiling,
Yes.
to add some stylized peacock feathers. They
Yes.
called them waves, right? And to add those, a few to the wood paneling, a few to the cornice to unify the room,
A few.
a few. Before we know it, a kind of mania had seized Whistler, and he writes about sort of spinning around in this fever, seeing nothing but blue and gold, and once he'd get to where he started,
Why, I had to paint part of it over again, as the difference would have been too marked. And the harmony in blue and gold developing, you know, I forgot everything in my joy in it.
he had to keep going and add more and more layers and build up. Whistler would say that his decision to gild the shelves set off Jekyll's carvings of the shelves to perfection.
One
You
can say that.
see them.
Yes.
Yes, you can see them much better there, I
Yes.
think. In the season, the Leylands would be at a summer home, Speke Hall. Then they would be in Liverpool in the winter and London in the spring for the spring season. Whistler works in a sort of mania, thinking he's going to give Leyland this wonderful surprise. I can't wait for you to see it. Don't come quite yet. He starts to make some of these alterations. Whistler starts inviting the press and art critics and friends into Leyland's home to see his creation. And so reviews of it start to get out. And Leyland is horrified. So remember, he'd only been asked to propose a color for the shutters. And we have the shutters functioning as almost folding screens,
Yes.
right? A la what we see behind the princess, in and
Yes.
of their own right.
Yes.
And this idea of the peacocks was nothing Leyland ever envisioned. What have you done?
All right, Jimmy, I've received your bill, and I think we should settle up our account. But as I told you the other day, I cannot consent to the amount you spoke of, £2,000. I really don't think you should have involved me in such a large expenditure.
You've exceeded your brief.
My very dear Leyland, it was you, after all, who asked me to help with the room last summer.
But I only asked for a few modest changes.
I stayed behind when everyone else, including you, had left town for the season. Every morning up at 6, working into the evening, nearly blind with sleep and blue peacock feathers.
But you did the additional work without any order from me.
And I gave you a brilliant surprise. There's no room in London like it, mon cher.
The gilded shelves, the peacock feathers on the ceiling, and those shutters, the peacocks you put on those shutters. I don't require them.
It is positively sickening to think that I should have labored to build up that exquisite Peacock Room for such a man to live in.
Let's agree to a fair price. A £1,000.
Whistler is saying, well, just the shutters alone are worth 1,000 guineas.
All right, we will split the cost of the room's true value. But mon cher, art will outlive money. Your fame is assured as the unappreciative owner of a room whose price you refused to pay.
How are you going to feel about someone coming into your home, which is meant to do one thing, showcase your prized collection of blue and white porcelain, and find that those pieces are overshadowed by what Whistler himself described as a riot of peacocks?
It's scarcely necessary for me to notice your assertion that I shall only be known as the possessor of your Peacock Room. You have degenerated into nothing but an artistic Barnum, a con artist. I shall forbid my servants to admit you, and if I find you near my wife, I'll publicly horsewhip you.
Theatrical in your thread, ridiculous in your rage, I refer you to the allegorical mural of the fighting peacocks. Behold the silver-crested peacock on the left. C'est moi, the artiste. The other, bedecked with coins and bristling silver feathers on its throat. Well, that is the patron in his customary frilled shirt front. The painting is no to all London as art and money, or the story of the room.
The story of the room is really the story of the breakdown of what had been a beautiful friendship.
I think they each felt that the other had betrayed them.
And that betrayal was more than just money. It was a decade of friendship. Leyland had been Whistler's biggest patron. Whistler spent time with his family. He corresponded with all 4 of the children, as well as Mrs. Leyland. When the children were sick, Whistler's mother nurses them through scarlet fever. And so, what a rupture. This wall had always been intended for an artwork that Whistler had been working on for over a decade by this point. Leyland's already paid for it in advance. It was called The Three Girls, while Whistler did create a study for it. And Leyland said, I'd really like to at least see the 3 girls installed there. He never delivers. Instead, he paints the feud on the wall. I think we need to really appreciate and acknowledge that radical transformation of Leyland's prize leather wall hangings. They have not just a Renaissance provenance, but a royal provenance.
Yes.
He
obliterates that.
He obliterates. They had liberated it, shall we say, at great expense from a home in Norwich. And so it's got this long provenance. That's what they're buying in a way. And so we can ask ourselves, as patrons of the art, as appreciators of the arts, of those who revel in these types of interior spaces, if we were Leyland, how might we feel?
Well, he did decide to keep it, though.
It's interesting, isn't it? Leyland never changes it. He dined regularly facing that image. I think we might say that after the initial shock wore off, he did see, as Whistler always maintained, that he had a true work of art, something that no one else had. Now, let's take a look at Whistler's last portrait of Leyland, the gold scab. You have the carapace of the venal capitalist industrialist hunched over a keyboard. And he's not seated on a traditional piano bench, but he's seated on Whistler's home, his beloved White House, designed by E.W. Godwin. It really was, in every way, a stage set for Whistler's life and career. And because of the dispute over the payment for the Peacock Room, he enters bankruptcy. His creditors, including Leyland, are allowed to go and pick and choose items to offset the amount owed. And that painting, The Three Girls, he took portraits he'd started of Leyland's family, including his daughters, cut the faces out so that Leyland couldn't claim them, and propped the gold scab up on an easel. So it was the first thing Leyland and everyone else saw when they entered. So he truly saw by that time Leyland's stubbornness and refusal to pay him the fee he thought he truly deserved as the instrument of his demise and bankruptcy. But with a personality like Whistler, he's never going to stay down for long. He heads off to Venice for a successful career creating etchings that are widely collected.
And what about Leyland?
The after story of the Peacock Room is that while Leyland lives with it, presumably enjoys it, I think probably even comes around to saying, this is really great. The owner of the house, after Leyland's death, not so much a fan. And is...
What was wrong with her?
She is a woman who needs to re-examine her values. And so this is where Charles Lang Freer comes in.
Mr. Freer.
Mr. Freer.
An American comes to rescue an American's work.
Isn't it marvelous? Freer is a great collector in his own right. He presents himself at Whistler's studio one day. Whistler recommends he goes to see the Peacock Room, make the offer for it. So Freer acquires it in toto.
In its entirety.
In its entirety. And it's through that connection that the Peacock Room comes to America. It's a big mystery. No one actually knows. They know the Peacock Room has been sold, but there's lots of speculation as to who might be buying it.
And little did they know it was going to Detroit.
Little did they know. They thought it was going with J.P. Morgan to New York. What Freer does is Freer builds a separate little pavilion.
He installs his own ceramic collection,
which is much more wide-ranging and, we could say, global than had been Leyland's collection. It's the Peacock Room now serving a function as a study center for art collections, which I think Whistler would have loved. He dies the year the Peacock Room comes to America. Today, the Peacock Room is at the heart of the National Mall in Washington, D.C., the National Museum of Asian Art, the first of the Smithsonian's.
Started by Freer.
And seen by so many people who also go in and their jaws drop. And then they start to learn all of the many facets of this fascinating story.
For all of you watching, keep the conversation going in the comments, and I'll see you next time.